Welcome to CommercialDrones.fm, the podcast that explores the commercial drone industry, the people who power it, and the concepts that drive it. I'm your host, Ian Smith. Hey everybody, and welcome to Commercial Drones FM. I'm sitting here in Las Vegas, Nevada at the Commercial UAV Expo, and I have Miss Robbie Hood here as a guest. She's the director of Unmanned Aircraft Systems of the Unmanned Aircraft Systems program at NOAA, which is the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, aka the Environmental Intelligence Agency. Welcome to the show, Robbie.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks so much for being here. So, first of all, maybe you can tell us a little bit about your background. I mean, how did you start working at NOAA? And, kind of how did you get here today?
Yeah, I actually am a meteorologist by training. I got a bachelor's degree in atmospheric science from University of Missouri a long time ago. And then I got a master's degree in physical meteorology from Florida State. And I started off working in private industry, and then I got a job for 21 years at NASA at Marshall Space Flight Center in Huntsville. And then I moved on to NOAA to be director of the Unmanned Aircraft System program. Oh,
cool. What did you do while you were at NASA? Were you doing meteorology or
meteorology from the standpoint of building new instruments? So I'm trained as a meteorologist, but I really ended up very interested in remote sensing and using sensors using different kinds of sensors to monitor weather. And at NASA, one of our main jobs was designing new research satellites for weather and different kinds of climate studies and different kinds of environmental or science studies. And many times you would either try out a new instrument on an aircraft first before you'd put it on the satellite, or you might have an aircraft instrument that might be used to calibrate and validate the satellite. So I was involved in a lot of different kinds of field experiments where we were using different aircraft to study hurricanes or tornadoes or different kinds of precipitation systems to help support some of the new NASA weather satellites.
So does NOAA also do that, right? They do the flying into the hurricanes and stuff?
Right. There's a slight difference in between what NASA does and what NOAA does. NOAA is actually an operational agency, and so they have the National Weather Service. So they collect data that's given directly to the forecasters so they can help forecast the weather.
So that's where all of our news forecasters get their data?
Exactly. Yeah, okay. Exactly. But they also have a research component, and it's called the Office of Oceanic and Atmospheric Research. And they, for many, many decades, have been flying P-3 aircraft at lower altitudes through hurricanes. And if you've ever heard of the NOAA hurricane hunters, that's who these folks are. They are hurricane experts, and they also fly through other kinds of weather systems over the ocean, too. At NASA, because you're trying to look at or trying to compare data with satellites, NASA tends to fly at higher altitude. So they would fly an aircraft called the ER-2 that flies at 60,000 feet above a storm, or they might fly a DC-8 that flies at 40,000 feet that might fly, collect information. They tended to use more remote sensors that were looking down through the atmosphere.
Okay. So now so we're kind of leading towards the whole drone component here. So you're the director of the Unmanned Aircraft Systems program. So what is that program? What does that program do, and why does it exist?
Yeah. Well, we're part of the Office of Oceanic and Atmospheric Research, and our job really is to look at all the new drone or UAS, unmanned aircraft system technology, and see how they could be used operationally within NOAA. So we have the National Weather Service within NOAA, we have the National Ocean Service, we have the National Marine and Fisheries Service, and we also have the Satellite Division, which is called NESIS, that collects national environmental information. And all of these are used to help us better understand and predict what's going to happen, whether it's a climate study or a weather study or ocean change or marine mammal changes, ecosystem changes, how our coasts are changing. So we collect a lot of information, both so we can understand the changes and then help predict. And then our ultimate goal is then to be able to share that information with the public and then help decision makers who must make decisions based on that kind of information. And then in turn using that data to help make sure our coastal regions and communities across the United States are more resilient to earth science changes.
So your division, or you yourselves are basically end users of drones then.
Exactly. That's the way we look at it. Yeah.
Okay.
I would say at NASA, I did aircraft research to help support the satellite. At NOAA, I'm studying how to use aircraft in a new way so we can support the operational, forecasters and scientists within the agency.
Okay, cool. So you mentioned coastal communities and stuff. So there was actually, I'm just drawing a comparison here. There was a really interesting, Nature Conservancy, nature.org, were doing this initiative, I guess it was called. It was like a citizen science initiative. And so now, since people have drones all the time, or not all the time, but drones are pretty, common to have now, you could participate. It was called Phones and Drones, and it was to monitor the coastal erosion effects of El Nino on the West Coast, from Washington down to the southern tip of California. And that was actually pretty interesting. I don't know if were you aware of that program that they were doing? Like you could take your drone up and then you could start taking photos of any water environmental events that you
right. Yeah, that might have been a state. I'm not familiar with that specific project because it might have been a state-run activity. But within NOAA, we have national marine sanctuaries, and they're like national parks. So there are regions of the ocean or coastline that are preserved, and we're trying to take care of them. Other times we've got groups that are actually doing coastal mapping. They're trying to understand how the coasts are changing. And we do a lot of monitoring. We have an office of response and restoration. So if there's an oil spill or a chemical spill, say in an ocean or a coastal region, they go out to help assess it. But many times in the coastal regions, you've got different agencies, different federal agencies and different state agencies and different county agencies all working together to collect information. So some of our work we're doing is we're looking at how can NOAA provide the data, and other times we're looking at how can our partner provide the data and NOAA still use it. So I think the example that you just explained was probably a state endeavor that hopefully that the NOAA scientists are probably familiar with.
That's cool. So now I'm thinking, I'm going to ask you. So the BP oil disaster, in the Gulf of Mexico. You remember that, of course. Do you think? Well, okay. If something like that were to happen again, is this something that NOAA would kind of step in now and maybe use this UAS, kind of leverage the UAS program and kind of do some type of monitoring activities for?
Well, we might, yeah. We've done some demonstrations, but we've tended to do those with other agencies. We actually have partnered with the Coast Guard, and we're very active in looking at and did simulation oil spills in the Arctic, and if there was an oil spill or some kind of oil disaster in the Arctic, how would the different agencies work together? So we actually brought some UAS, hand launchable UAS, to a Coast Guard ice cutter, and we did an experiment for 3 years.
The ice cutter is like one of those ships that goes.
Yeah, that actually cuts through the ice, and that's the job of the Coast Guard. And if a person is stranded, a ship is stranded, it's a Coast Guard's job to go in and cut through it.
Yeah.
But they all share responsibilities when there's an oil spill. And some of our efforts at NOAA are then to look at how would you restore the environment back to what it was. So everybody shares responsibility in monitoring the oil spill, and then NOAA has additional responsibilities in being able to judge how severe the oil spill was to the ecosystems and then how you could restore it. So we have looked at we're actually working through what's the best business case for us to have our own vehicles and fly, or maybe have a partnership, say, with several agencies, either state agencies or federal agencies, or use local providers to get information quickly.
That's really interesting. So I'd love to talk a little bit more about that. So, this is somewhat similar to something that I'm always very interested in now. So drones, of course, are fairly new in their widespread usage and adoption. Enterprise companies. I would call NOAA similar to an enterprise company. I mean, you're a pretty big organization,
right?
Large amount of employees and people. So I could liken this to a question for enterprise companies that I sometimes have is that, do you see yourselves operating the drones, or do you want to contract out third-party providers or contractors to do it for you? And the reason why this is interesting is because right now, there are a ton of drone service providers,
right?
Folks that may even, they might have had a drone and said, oh, I can try to monetize this thing now that the regulations are there, or people that just really wanted to get into this drone, rodeo, for lack of a better term, to try to make a little bit of money. So your perception of this, and from, you're a federal agency, correct?
Right. That's right.
So what is your perception on this? What goes into determining who is going to operate the drones for or with NOAA? Yeah,
it's definitely an evolving business case because when I started the job 8 years ago, we were looking more at how could NOAA acquire these, and there's many cases where NOAA would maybe acquire these, and some of the smaller ones we might have trained scientists that understand how to operate them. And once they get up to a more expensive or more complex level, we actually have the Office of Marine and Aviation Operations, and we actually have pilots in the agency that could operate these.
Okay.
But I would say, too, one of the business cases we're looking at are data buys. Are there local companies or local partnerships that we could take advantage of so that we purchase the services and we're basically buying the data, and a company could decide which drone to use, or they could decide if it's a manned aircraft or a drone, that they're just giving us the data at the end of the day. The most important thing, though, is we've also learned too that in a disaster situation like a fire or a chemical spill or an oil spill or anything in those, there's such a network of emergency managers all working together that you have to make sure that you're following the protocols of how resources are used. So normally there's one agency that might be the lead, and so we want to make sure too, if we're going to develop policies, that they're going to be done in the proper way, and that we don't just show up with a device to collect data.
Y'all, we're here with the drones.
Yeah, but I would say that one of the business cases we want to look at is purchasing from local providers, because one of our rationales is if you've got a company in the area and then maybe they're flying an insurance project today, and then they might fly for another company, another reason for a farmer tomorrow. If they are already in the area, FAA is already used to them. They're used to the local terrain. They
certified.
Might be. Exactly. They might be the best providers instead of trying to bring in, a special team, a SWAT team for drones, to come in. And there may be situations where that's more appropriate too. We're just trying, we're trying to see how things are going to settle out with the industry and the regulations and really what we can afford as well.
What is your area of operations?
Well, actually, what we're trying to look at is really the whole United States. We have responsibilities for all over the United States and globally. So we're really looking at more, how are the applications? And one of my jobs is to say, we have fisheries scientists that really want to understand coastal changes and how those impact, let's say, marine mammals or the local fish populations. We also have other coastal scientists that want to understand, sea level rise changes or things like that, or weather conditions. And so what I'm trying to match up is, when do people have similar requirements? They may be different kinds of scientists. They may be a biologist versus a physicist versus a atmospheric scientist, but do they have similar needs, like mapping needs? And how can we match up those kind of capabilities so that there can be some economies of scale within our agency, so that we have either common procedures or common payloads and platforms or common, data management algorithms and things like that will help us so that people can use the data in a similar way.
Yeah, so one of the reasons why I asked that question of your area of operations is because I think I knew the answer was going to be, the entire United States. And in that, it raises a few issues, is that the United States is huge.
Yeah.
So how are you going to get, you might need to, and I just had another conversation here at the UAV Expo with Nate from Bechtel. And they're a huge company. They're an enterprise company, an end user as well.
Right.
And so what their challenge is also they're global. So they have different regulations to worry about, just like you. And then also, it might make more sense. So they want to do a mixture, basically.
Yeah, exactly.
We're going to operate some ourselves, and we're going to also contract out some others. And then the mechanism in which you find these pilots who can operate this, I guess, I don't know if you have any ideas of how you're going to do that yet, but there are plenty of little directories and services out there that'll help you do it. And some companies that are going to really be specializing in helping large entities get really nice certified, buttoned up service for this.
Yeah, it's really going to, the whole industry's been so fascinating to watch over the last few years, because every time we think we've got it figured out, then, another change will happen. And I think, with the new Part 107 rules, I think we're really going to see a lot of stabilization in companies. And so, that's why I'm saying I'm not trying to hedge my bets, but, we had a business model we were looking at 5 years ago, and now we're starting to say, well, maybe we need to take a different look, and maybe it's a different tact. But it all comes down to individual. The other part is we have these line offices, but we have a lot of individual line offices. For example, there's 122 National Weather Service offices in the United States. And so if every one of them had their own drone system, that's a big inventory. But maybe they're co-located with another NOAA office, a fisheries office, or another,
I bet
ocean
DJI
office.
would give you guys a great deal on 122 drones.
But there might be ways that, we can share assets or share data or, so it's really, it's going to be evolving just like everything else in the, drone industry right now.
That's true. So for custom, you guys do some interesting things. So you mentioned mapping activities, mapping the coast, trying to, find out different things about the ocean and the atmosphere, which is your domain.
Right.
Are you guys planning on putting any special sensors on these drones that can also take I did a project one time, believe it or not, on the global sea surface temperature rise. And I actually took the stance. Oh my God, I'm going to get schooled right now. But I took the stance in that global sea surface temperature, there's not a noticeable change in rise, when I'm pretty sure the data says that there is. I don't know what your thoughts on there are on that. But anyways, custom sensors, with a camera, you can't really tell the temperature of the ocean. And you can't do other things like that with just a regular camera. So
yeah, we're really interested in the whole business area of sensor development and miniaturization of sensors. And there's also basically that plays into which kind of platform you want. Sometimes our scientists will just say, well, I want a little platform because they know that's the least expensive one. But it may be more tedious to try to get, if you're mapping, if you're trying to observe a large area, it may be much more tedious than to use, say, a higher altitude aircraft where you can cover more ground. So a lot of it's trying to match up in what's happening, in the industry. It's been fascinating for me to watch because 5 years ago, it really, with a lot of the smalls, it really was just basic camera systems. And people used to talk about the payload and the platform is one and the same. And I have some oceanographers we're working with, and they've told me, well, I don't like that platform because I don't like the data, or I don't like this platform because I don't like the format the data's in. And I've reminded them several times. It's like, well, once the industry matures, it's you'll be able to define the data, and it'll be up to a service provider to give that data to you. So having more choices, hyperspectrals, LIDARs, multispectrals, SAR radars, those are all going to be really important going forward. But especially, we're trying to figure out which of the scientists want the raw data so that they can manipulate it themselves, and which scientists just want to buy it. They just want they want the analysis. And I think one of the common themes of this conference is it's not just it's not the pictures, it's the analysis that goes with it and the data product. So, it's definitely going to be involving. But I think there's definitely a role for people that are really interested in the data delivery and data manipulation and data analysis.
do you get a lot of value right now from just a standard RGB sensor?
Yeah, it just depends on the application. So we have oceanographers in NOAA that are really they're focused on marine mammal entanglements, like a whale. If it gets entangled in a fishing net and it gets beached, they want something quick and dirty. Let me fly this really quickly, and go out and take a look at that animal to see how much stress it's under. There's a lot of cases like that where they're trying to protect, they want to take a look at an animal or a dangerous region before they send the people out. So they want quick and dirty looks. But then others really want really three-dimensional detailed maps. They're going to do, land
Point
change.
clouds.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, like definitely, especially after we've got some of our river forecast centers that are interested in monitoring rivers before and after floods, or going out on a regular basis to see what are the water levels and how are the terrain changes. And I've learned that even in a flooding situation, whether it's a winter time and you have little vegetation on the trees versus a summertime when you've got a lot of trees, that makes a difference. So it's both getting quick data fast, but it's also being able to go out consistently on a very routine basis. So once a week or once and especially in the Arctic, I think once drones really can be more productive there, we're gonna it's gonna be a real boom, because there's just so little data that we can collect in the Arctic right now. We've got satellite data and we have ships and ice camps, but being able to fly, either whether it's a water vehicle or a land rover or an aircraft system, being able to go out and sample sea ice conditions or weather conditions over the sea ice, and having a better understanding of what's happening there is going to be really important.
So you have a satellite background. I mean, you've spent a lot of time working on satellites, working with satellites. Satellite versus drone. So we've been talking about drones this whole time. A lot of the activities you're mentioning, I'm sure, are complementary,
right.
Satellites and drones. What are your thoughts on that? Like, when are you pulling out, when are you saying we need to get the drone there stat versus we'll just use the satellite imagery?
Yeah, I really, it's the same thing as talking about manned aircraft too. You really, right now, we're not in a place where it's either or. What I try to tell people is when you think about the higher altitude aircrafts like the Predators and the Global Hawks, and you put scientific, sensors on those, think of those as augmentation of the satellite, because the satellite gives you very good global coverage, but sometimes it's not there when you need it, and sometimes it still sees things a little less coarsely than you would with the high altitude drone. So the drone's giving you extra detail, but it's not. It's like the difference between a biopsy, or it's like the difference between an X-ray and a CAT scan. The satellite's more like the CAT scan and give you the big broad picture, but you still need an X-ray, a quick and dirty X-ray once in a while. So that's one issue. I think too, especially in the weather realm, we're starting to think about, could you have a network of drones that are collecting meteorological information real low in the atmosphere, so that they could augment the ground-based networks, the rain gauge networks, and the radar networks, because there's a certain part of the atmosphere we need more observations, more detailed observations.
What altitude are we talking about when you say
From about
that?
The surface up to about 2,000 feet. It's called we call it the boundary layer. It's that boundary of atmosphere right above the surface. And there's a lot of information there to help that we think we need to understand in order to better forecast. Whether it's what the behavior of a hurricane is going to do, or even how when frontal systems are moving through, whether where you're going to have thunderstorm development, where you're not going to have thunderstorm. It may develop on really localized, part of it may be localized conditions, so having a better understanding. So thinking of them as augmentations to our current observing system is actually, I think it's the way it's going to pan out. But the sensors are always going to get better. So satellite sensors are always going to get better, and aircraft sensors are always going to get better. So I think it's going to be basically an optimization exercise for a given application. Mm-hmm. Is it better to have a big satellite and two high altitude ones, and then then a ground-based radar network, or do you want some CubeSats in there? I think so. There's a lot of trade space that, I think CubeSats and high altitude aircraft could be considered, somewhat equal, not exactly equal, but they're kind of. That's what you're actually, with each observing system, you're actually adding a different layer of resolution, spatial and temporal resolution.
What is the difference between a CubeSat and a regular sat?
Yeah, CubeSats are traditionally really, really small. They're like the size, sometimes they're not much bigger than a shoebox.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and the idea is to launch a swarm of those so that they're all working together instead of a big satellite that may have multiple instruments. So CubeSat satellites are really they're considered they're given a lot of consideration now because they can be built quickly. NSF and National Science Foundation and NASA are looking at them as student projects too. It's a good way for us.
Cool.
Student design sensors.
Awesome. One of my colleagues, I think, had a CubeSat that was in made it in the International Space Station or something. I don't know.
Yeah,
but
exactly.
Very interesting guy. Shout out to Manu Sharma. That's awesome. So I'm kind of very giddy with excitement that we have a meteorologist here, expert, because I have to ask, and this is not really related. Are average global sea surface temperatures rising? I can't get it out of my head. I need to know your opinion on this. My stance, I'm pretty sure, was incorrect, but I had to take one.
We definitely have to monitor it. Let me put it that way. So we have to. It's a serious enough problem that we have to pay very close attention. So one of our duties in NOAA is to monitor coastal changes and to see what the sea surface conditions are.
So let's back up a little bit, actually, give the listeners some context. So what are the effects if indeed global sea surface temperatures are rising? That means how are we affected?
Yeah, you're going to have higher sea levels along the coast, so that it's actually going to start encroaching on your beaches, and it may impact how close you can build your houses to the beach, or how both how destructive if storms impact. You may not have as much barrier with sand barriers and things like that. One of the really interesting uses we're starting to use UAS is that we have as part of the National Ocean Service, one of their jobs is to monitor basically monitor the Earth's surface in the United States. And to do that, they fly very, very accurate sensors on manned aircraft that collect gravity information. And they can convert the gravity information to surface height. So it's really good for being able to map floodplains and and coastal sea surface levels. So by updating those maps, we are going to be more intelligent about what kind of disasters may happen, with as either storms increase or water levels increase. And one of the things that we did was put out a small business innovative research project. And the company that won it is Aurora, and they have been flying. They basically worked with another company that developed a brand new gravity sensor. And one of the things, the way to collect this data, the way they do it now is they have a manned aircraft, and it's a really, really boring flight for a pilot. He just fly back and forth. And it turns out eventually over 15, 20 years, they got to go over every square inch of the United States.
Wow.
And that's the product that they're developing. And it's for a pilot, it's just so boring, and it has to be flown so precisely. So we talked to our friends and said, this is kind of a dull mission for a pilot. Why don't we try a UAS? And at the time, our gravity experts said, well, our instruments are really particular. We don't know if they'll be able to fly on a unmanned aircraft. But we said, well, let's give it a shot. We put out an SBIR, and we've been working on this project for, over 2 years now. And the team flew their first demonstration of a gravity sensor on it's the Aurora Centaur, which is an optionally piloted aircraft. So you can have a pilot in the cockpit, but it can still be controlled by a control room, pilots elsewise. And once they flew the instrument, at first they had a redesigned instrument that was just for the UAS.
What is a gravity sensor? I'm sorry, I don't.
It's a sensor that can detect gravity to very, very precisely. And so gravity, we all think of gravity as one number, but it really changes from one location to another based on the elevation of the surface of the Earth. So it's very changeable. We don't, the average person doesn't notice any changes, but it is, and it takes a very sensitive instrument to measure that. So when we flew the first test flights, the scientists were actually really impressed with the performance of the UAS. It was operated from a control room, but they had a pilot sitting in the cockpit. And they said it was some of the best data they ever had. And they think part of it is because the autopilot on the UAS is designed for precision because it's a robot, whereas an autopilot on a manned aircraft is designed for comfort. So when you go to make a turn, you want to do it gently, so you're not bothering the passengers on the plane. Yeah. But in a UAS, it's a robot trying to get the job done. So They said it was actually in the long run it was much more accurate data than they'd seen before. So what they're going to be doing over the next few years is flying both the unmanned and the manned aircraft over time to see, if the manned aircraft could be as dependable and precise as what they think it's going to be.
Do you, do you have a drone yourself by any chance? Your own personal drone?
Years ago, I bought one for my husband when I first got this job, and we've never flown it that much, to tell you the truth. So we have one in the house. We have one in the house that we can play with when we want to. But ours is old and so old now that it would be like an old television set. It's not.
Yeah, it's only like 6 months old, but it's already like a television set. No, we need to get you a more state of the art indoor flying drone. You can get them on Amazon. I mean, it's crazy.
Yeah.
How many people are on the Unmanned Aircraft Systems team at NOAA?
Yeah, well, my staff is probably around 5 or 6 dedicated employees, but I fund projects across the agency. So I fund projects in the National Weather Service. So I fund projects. So my budget in general is about $5 million a year.
Okay, so you got to make do with that and get as much bang for your buck as you can.
Exactly. So we do a lot. I fund projects, but we try to do partnerships as much as we can. We work with other government agencies that are using drones. We have done CRADAs, which are government private industry partnerships, where we might provide the observing requirements or the scenario, and let a vendor come and bring some of their new equipment that they want to try out. We've done that too.
Cool. So what excites you the most about the drone industry right now? I mean, have you been to the UAV Expo before, or did you go to any of the drone shows last year or anything?
This is my first one at the commercial UAV Expo. This is my first time here. I've been to other drone conferences around the country. There's 2 things that excite me the most. It's how the data are going to be used. I mean, the aircraft part is a lot of fun. I mean, it's
You're
a lot
data
of
nerd.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun to watch. It's a lot of fun to watch. But at the end of the day, it's the data, and how can we? It's not like the early days of satellite where you got the data and then you figured out, how to use it with other data. I think because we have so many observing systems that are already working together, it's going to be easy to bring the drone, or it'll be fun and innovative to bring the drone into this mix. The other part that really gets me excited is because it's such a fast developing industry, but there's so many different aspects. There's little drones and big drones. I'm just really excited about that it may be an opportunity to really build a truly diverse workforce. That you could actually use this as, especially if you think about starting disadvantaged populations or minority populations in colleges, working with small drones and letting them develop their careers going forward. I think it's definitely a way to really kind of branch out in science and engineering to open the doors to to make it a diverse workforce. We have an opportunity. We really have a rich opportunity to make this as diverse a workforce as it should be.
Totally, yeah. So that brings to mind, the drone industry right now is it's becoming less and less so, fortunately. It's been, at least in its earliest stages, we're mainly dominated by men. And so I had Sally French. I don't know if you know who that is. She's a drone girl on Twitter. She's a really great kind of drone personality. She does a lot of cool reporting. And she was on the show, and so we were talking about, okay, we need to get more women in the drone industry. And so what would be some of your advice maybe to a young lady who either wants to get started in wants to take the path for environmental or meteorology, or getting into the drone industry, someone who's passionate about that stuff? Maybe what would you say to that person to kind of help them out and encourage them?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think part of it still goes back to the data. To me, data is an equalizer. You can, and I would definitely, if you had told me when I was younger that I would be, this involved in an aviation environment, I would have thought you're crazy, because I just wasn't. I liked the data, but I wasn't that big into technology. But once my career moved forward, I found out I really did have a passion for innovation. And to me, that's the other fun part, is working with something that's so new and changing so rapidly every day. And in the early part of my career, when I first started working with aircraft and field campaigns, I would be the only woman sometimes on a science team. Now this whole industry it's so diverse. There's women, but there's young people. There's all peoples of all different kinds of ages, and you really don't have to be a pilot. You come from a pilot background to get involved. You can come from an information background or a computer science background. There's different avenues to get involved, and there's different ways you can contribute. So I think that's exciting.
Cool. Data is the equalizer. I love it. That's true. Well, cool. Thank you so much, Robbie Hood. Thank you so much for being on the show. That was really eye-opening. I have so many more questions that I didn't even get to ask, but we'll have to try to do a follow-up maybe if we can sometime. You can go ahead and check out what NOAA is doing with drones at uas.noaa, that's NOAA.gov on your web browser, and then give their website a quick glance there. And that's really it. If you want to follow the Drone Podcast, do so on Twitter at Drones Podcast, Facebook.com/Drones Podcast, and you can subscribe on iTunes or whatever if you like what you're hearing. We'd love to have you come back and listen once again. So thank you so much, Robbie. We really appreciate you being on the show. And we are going to now cut off the mics. Fly safe, everybody. Cheers.